Hello, Erika. Hello, everyone. My name is Kirill Gerstein, and you've tuned into Kirill Gerstein Invites. This is an online forum hosted by Kronberg Academy, and we meet here in this virtual space and hear various brilliant people talk about something they're passionate about. And with composers especially, unlike with performers, I find that it's interesting to talk about their life, their background, and of course, first and foremost, their music. And today I am joined by Erika Fox. She is a wonderful composer, a teacher, and a fascinating personality. She was born in Vienna in 1936, came to England as a war refugee. And as you may have heard, even from this snippet that we've just listened to, her music is a very distinct voice, and she suggested titling the discussion today is Music from Elsewhere. And I think that may be an interesting departure point to in fact ask Erika what she means by that, music from elsewhere, and to get into her music. We have examples and just explore from there. And as always, your questions are most welcome. And this is a live session. This is not just a recording on YouTube, so you can actually influence the proceedings by posing questions and comments, and that's most welcome. Erika, thank you for agreeing to this online experiment and talking to us.
Thank you for inviting me. I've got a few notes here because I thought if I didn't have a few notes, I'd forget. So regarding this elsewhere idea, it is simply because it became apparent to me during the course of my composing life that my music kind of was very, very different and had a different origin to Western classical music. And even though I studied here at the college and afterwards, somehow I never felt very close to the sounds that I was hearing, and the methods, in fact, of composition were very foreign to me, so foreign that I simply couldn't manage. And when you said composer and teacher, I don't consider myself much of a teacher, but I have had some success in teaching, which I can only put down to inspiration rather than methodology. Some of my students have been inspired to do their own thing very much, rather than any sort of academic teaching. I think I'm trying to say. I hope I've made that clear. So my background is not only Jewish, but Hassidic Jewish, which is a very special sect of Judaism, which started really in the, I think, early 18th century. It's not very old, in Eastern Europe. And the founder was a rabbi called the Baal Shem Tov, whose dates were 1698 to 1760, and he was born in Ukraine. And the name, which is in Hebrew, translates as Master of the Good Name. And that particular group of people really emphasized a certain kind of religion, which was very much based in mysticism and the inner life, and some kind of ecstasy, perhaps brought about by prayer. But the prayer was vocal and chanted, and it was somehow finding a way to the divine through music and through singing, chanting, but singing, in fact. And I have a few pictures, in fact, that I have as a sort of illustration of what I might mean by this. And an artist that very much represents what I have in mind is called Arik Brauer, or Arik Brauer, who lived partly in Vienna and partly in Israel. And he only recently died, actually, at the age of 92. I only just realized. I found out when I looked him up. Anyway, I have some pictures here, a couple by him, one of them by my own mother, who painted my grandfather, who was a rabbi, saying prayers outside to bring in the full moon. There is a prayer for that, and she painted that. Well, one of them is actually what we looked at during the practice run, and it's a whole group, a huddled together group of men. They're always men, these praying with prayer shawls. And the reason I've shown this picture, actually, which, let me put my glasses on, sorry, and oh, here it is, yes, indeed, is because it is to somehow illustrate the inner nature, the very enclosed nature of the idea, and also, in fact, of the music, which will be apparent later, my own, which really is very much made up of short phrases closing in on themselves. And so you know, this picture, which is an extraordinary picture, I think, rather wonderful, just in black and white. I don't think we need to see the next picture, but it is a title of a book, and it's called Versunkene Welt, which is translated as a vanished world, but it's more than vanished somehow. And it illustrates that that whole really movement, which of course has proliferated all over the world, here and in the States and in Israel, but it has never been the same as it was in my grandfather's day, and the place that I'm talking about, where I actually hardly remember, but was born into, because all those people really are dead, but very many of them, the majority in fact, were murdered, of course, during the Holocaust. And those that survived remember, I mean, I remember a bit, perhaps quite a lot, but nobody will remember very soon. It has in fact gone. You might like to show the next picture, which is the one with my grandfather and the moon. If you've got it, maybe we could see that. Yes, that's it. And then there are two pictures, both by Erich Brauer, and both, I think, very much illustrating not only kind of the inner mystical feel of this whole movement. I'll call it a movement, I'm not quite sure what to call it. The first being one with flames, real flames, but I suppose showing something about the ardent flame, inner flame of whoever is sitting there, which is, oh, that's right, that's the one. Every time I look at these pictures, I'm amazed how wonderful they are, really. And again, one other one, which is outdoors, and kind of things are happening, but this person is just sitting, reading or looking very closely at a book. I think this school, of his school, was called Fantastic Realism. There is another school of painting called Magical Realism, but this is called Fantastic Realism, and he founded it. There are a few musical examples regarding what I've just said. Maybe we could listen to them. Yes, I think that might be an idea. That isn't my music, of course, as you realize. It is somebody chanting. It's from Czechoslovakia, and it's kind of a prayer for victims of the Holocaust, but it does illustrate certain musical patterns, scales, really, and the fact that it's not harmonic, it's really just melodic. Hang on a second. I'll say that there are 3 musical examples. And so the first one is the one I've mentioned. The second one is a very early little piece of mine, which is, I think, 4 minutes long. And you can stop it anytime you like within the 4 minutes, of course. But it also kind of illustrates the sort of melodic inspiration, if you like, that was in my early music and has never really changed. And then I think we'll leave out the third example. I don't know quite why I thought of that. I sort of know, because at that time I was thinking of ornaments. And of course, this music and this chanting is very ornamental. It has quarter tones, really, and the ornaments are not seen as ornaments, or rather heard as ornaments. They're part of the fabric. Without them, there isn't the music at all. And as an illustration within Western music of this, I think we spoke about that before. I thought of Chopin's ornamentation, grace notes and so on are very much part of the fabric. Without them, there wouldn't be the music, really. But I don't see the point of playing that. We will perhaps then go on to another track, which is 09. And that has a little story attached, which is that I once went to a seminar of Jewish music, and an American came to give a lecture. And actually the seminar had a sort of question, is there such a thing as Jewish music? A lot of people went to it, including Alexander Goer, who I think said there isn't such a thing. And I sort of agreed with him. In a way, I think there isn't. But nevertheless, every people has its characteristic, if you like, and some of these come into the music. And this is a recording of an American fiddle player who was, well, he wasn't American, but he was in America that he was interviewed. Leon Schwartz was his name. And he's dead now, long dead. But he spoke, in fact, about my grandfather and about him going to the synagogue to hear my grandfather sing. He calls it davening, which means praying, but really it's singing, and the effect it had on him. And with his violin, he's playing a little bit of that music that he remembered. So maybe if you would be so kind, you could play 3 of those tracks. The first being the Czech rabbi, the second being a little piece of mine for oboe and cello, and the last being sort of 09, which is this American guy playing the violin. Is that okay for you?
Yes, fantastic.
How do you feel about that?
So here it goes. Here's the prayer, and then we'll hear the first piece of yours, and maybe I'll ask you some follow-up questions about those before we go on to the third piece. But in any case, here's the first one.
And as I said, really, you don't have to play the whole lot. Just stop whenever you like, you know.
Okay, that's a big responsibility, but I'll try.
You know, if one plays the whole of everything, we'll be here all evening. So, you know.
Yes, here we go. Perhaps I'll stop the first track
a good place.
here.
That's a good place.
But it's very, very poignant. So here's your piece, the first one that you mentioned. didn't
That's
want
a very old piece. I wrote that in 1967, I think.
So this already many questions, and don't, on one hand, don't want to interrupt your flow, but cannot resist asking some questions, if I may. And I think, especially once in this context, one can hear the relation between the first track that you demonstrate with the prayer and this sort of ornamented line and your piece. But if you could talk more about what you feel the connection is and how you come to this connection. Is it purely through, you feel, through your childhood experiences of hearing these sounds, or is it more conscious, or is it both?
Well, all I can say is certainly was never conscious. I once had a teacher, she was quite a well-known harpsichord player. Her name was Millicent Silver, and she had two daughters, Sarah and Hannah, and Sarah and I I was always invited to their house for Christmas. And after Christmas dinner, we never enjoyed Christmas dinner, because about 3 o'clock, people used to ask us, we had to play. Sarah played the oboe and I played the piano, and I never knew what to play, so I used to improvise. And it was really nerve-wracking. And once, after I played for a bit, Millis said to me, I don't know why you always play this Polish music. Now, you know, I had no idea what she was talking about, really. And neither had she, obviously, because it wasn't Polish music, but whatever it wasn't English music. And so really, I had no other way of thinking than remembering the music that I heard in my own home, because we had a synagogue in our house was a synagogue, in fact, with my grandfather as the rabbi. And that is the music I heard, and it was always sung. It was never played. So actually, everything I've ever written, somehow, I think of it as a song. I mean, even when it's an orchestral piece, even when there are many players, each person has a solo part, and it is, to my ears, somehow a song. So I'm not sure if that even in part answers your question.
No, it very much does.
Maybe it does.
It does very much. Thank you. I wanted to ask, and so when you say these are the things that you heard at home, am I presuming that this is still before you had to leave Austria? So this is by the time you're around 3 or so.
No, it was after we left. This synagogue, well, it was there as well, but when we came here, it was kind of transplanted into northwest London, Swiss Cottage. We had a big Victorian house, and it served as a synagogue. The whole downstairs was the synagogue. And for me, because I was so little, my grandfather used to let me come into the men's part, because, you know, actually, unfortunately, within the Jewish religion and probably many others, women don't figure very largely. Anyway, not in prayer. And so I went, I was in the men's room, and I always listened. I mean, I used to love it. I used to sit there and just take it all in, you know. And it was pretty wonderful, really. I mean, thinking back, because it's very rare that I get a chance in a way to talk about it. But of course, you know, memories come, and when you're little, or even well, even particularly when you're growing up, and this was very true of me, I didn't want to belong to that. I wanted to be English. I wanted to fit into where I came, but I didn't. I realize now, and never quite fitted in, and was always a part of that other world that was gone, you know. So I don't know if you feel like having a go at playing the little talk and the little violin thing, which was apparently one of the things my grandfather sang, but of course it will be quite different on the violin. And obviously there's no recording of my grandfather, but it is worth perhaps, I was amazed to hear this, in fact. I bought it and didn't know what I was going to hear. And then when I heard my grandfather's name, I was absolutely staggered.
We descendant from the Baal Shem Tov.
He was the founder of
Hasidism. So this is one of the songs that he sang that made a big impression on everybody, especially on me. And the name of the Rebbe was the Reb Sholemke. The Rebbe was from Storozhenitz, and that was also in the Bukovina. So we always used to like to go for Rosh Hashanah and Kippur to that rabbi, to daven, because he davened beautiful. And to listen to his praying, to his davening, was something out of this world. The joy we got from this rabbi, there was no comparison. You were like in a different world. Like in a different world. It was like a therapy, because, like I said, you were like in a different world. Everything is doing it.
You can stop it whenever you feel like it. There isn't a real stop.
It's a fascinating document.
It is, isn't it? Extraordinary. I have a picture of a piece which, I mean, a lot of the scores that I've got pictures of that you've got there are really illustrations of the fact that every instrument has its own part. That seems to be certainly true of track 9 and track 13. But track 10 illustrates again, you know, really the source of my material. It is the first piece on my CD. It's called Paths Where the Mourners Tread, and it's for large ensemble. If you wouldn't mind playing a little bit of that.
here's the score for track 9, and here's the corresponding sound to it as well. And here it is.
Regarding track 14, in fact, which is music, I've tried to illustrate a bit of that with track 11 here. That's another picture of men at prayer, but it does also illustrate the fact that, unlike in a church, for instance, where everybody's singing together a hymn or whatever, and there's a response all together, in a synagogue it's quite different. Everybody does their own thing in their own time, and so it is very haphazard. And I find that a very good illustration of some of the work that I've written for many instruments, which rather than harmonic is just heterophonic. Everybody does their own thing within parameters, obviously, but it's very pronounced in a piece that I wrote for 36 instruments. It's called Ozen Shomat, which comes from Ecclesiastes in the Bible, meaning the hearing ear. And I think that certainly track 13 on your picture does illustrate very much the fact that every instrument, almost every, does its own thing. So the most sort of heterophonic look is in track 13, and I've got a bit of that to illustrate the music after that in track 14. Every one of these strings, you see, has a different part.
And I wanted to ask you, perhaps now is the time, or we will come to it later as well. But this, you wrote the harmony that you wanted it to be lines, and so it seems like that you are either wanting to avoid harmony, or you naturally feel a lack of need for it. Could you talk about that more? Because that seems like a very fascinating element. So your relationship with harmony or non-harmony.
Well, I'm just trying to think how best to put it. As a matter of fact, I have not been very good at writing conventional harmony. I mean, in once where I'd harmonized the Bach chorale and started it with 4 octaves. And there was great hilarity, of course. It took me a while to realize what I'd done wrong. So somehow I just don't think vertically. I always somehow think horizontally. But of course, I do plan my notes. They're not just any old notes. So, the simultaneous sound that will come out of all that you see there is based actually on the note D, and it's just a kind of play on the note D, really. I haven't tried to avoid, I've never tried to avoid harmony. But I came to realize, and quite late actually, that I was able to make music in my own way. And I didn't have to follow what other people do, because originally I thought, well, I can't do it, but then it seemed that some people thought it sounded okay. And I thought, well, all right, I can do it this way. I don't have to think along the same lines as Western musical tradition, which has a subject and it's developed, and harmonic progressions happen in a particular way. I just don't think, I can't think in those terms. I'm not good at it, really. I suppose that's all I can say.
Could you talk more about the guiding principles? So you say, well, this excerpt that we see is about the note D, more or less. But what are some of the guiding principles that come in play for you that are not the harmonic guiding principles that so often are relied on?
Well, I try, obviously, having come from a tradition which is partly chanting, but over a very limited few notes. And that makes a difficult way of thinking in order to create a larger piece. What do you do about length? How do you create a kind of architecture when you haven't got harmonic structure in that way? And it's often very haphazard. I use notes based on, I use note rows actually based on names or what I'm thinking about, or that sort of thing. I mean, I wrote a theatre piece where there was a note row, a different row, a bit like a leitmotif, a different note row for every character and every situation. And each of these rows, which are really the lines I'm talking about, are developed in the way you heard, in fact, that chanting. Each line is repeated, but not ever exactly. There's another piece I have later on, a bit to illustrate, for 2 pianos, which is a theatre piece. but it is a bit like a set of variations, but nothing happens exactly the same way. So in these charts, for instance, they sound kind of enclosed. They're not very open things, but nothing happens twice. Or if it does, it's decorated somehow the second time, or emphasized with decoration, a bit like the Chopin that I was talking about before. I'm not quite sure how else to explain things. I find it very difficult, of course, to talk about music. It is music's very difficult to talk. I mean, some people talk wonderfully about music and about their own music. I remember often hearing Peter Maxwell Davies, who spoke very well and was very erudite about his own work. But I couldn't ever kind of marry what he said to what I heard. So it's sometimes quite difficult, really, to talk about music. I think, maybe you find it easy to talk about. I never do. I don't know what to say. That's why I think I always tell people to listen instead, because after all, it's another language, and it's definitely not in words.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. And most people, I think, when they talk about music, end up talking about their feelings about music and how music makes them respond. But very little success has been achieved in talking about the substance of music. One can talk about the arithmetics of music and the structure and the number of bars, but this is not talking about music. And one can talk about how it makes you feel. But to say something about the thing itself seems to be terribly unsuccessful, or possibly outside of our cognitive capacity. But that let me sidetrack you for a second from your music and your creations to teaching, because as much as you throw up the disclaimer, you have been an active teacher, and one of your students who speaks very highly about you and programs your music now is Thomas Ades. And at the same time, you wrote to me that you don't think one can teach composition, which echoes a quote that Tom Ades cited from Mr. Kurtak, who apparently said to him, composition cannot be taught, at best it can be encouraged. So where do you stand on teaching and on teaching composition in particular?
Well, actually, I didn't know that Kurtak had said that. And it doesn't surprise me, because he's one of the greats, in my opinion. He's absolutely wonderful. And I totally agree. You can't teach it. I used to think that you couldn't teach music at all, other than, a technique of playing or something. When I had spent some time teaching the juniors at the Guildhall, I realized that one had to teach certain things, one had to show, and one had to help people along. But actually, it is really nothing more than encouragement. You play things to them, you talk about the things you play. I used to do with smaller children, I used to do I don't know what you'd call it. I used to use a lot of the Dalcroze technique. And I had lessons sometimes where I never spoke at all, but I used to play. They knew what a sound meant, that they then had to move to. And so it was a kind of ballet, really, rather than words and notes and so on, because it was a way of trying to help young people to actually hear what they hear. You have to help people to know what to listen for. It doesn't always help just to say listen, because some of us listen well, some of us don't listen very well. And anyway, all of us have to be helped to know what to listen for. So there is that. But as far as, say, Tom is concerned, I met him first, of course, he was in my class when he was 10, I think, and very evidently had a touch of genius at that age. And I'm always surprised when he says that I taught him, because I always used to think he taught me. You know, he was so extraordinarily gifted. But I must have taught him something in a way, because I do remember he was in my class, and I then had a request from his mother that he wanted to come to me one-to-one. So there must have been something that we had together in a way that made him, he didn't need much encouragement, but I think we all need some encouragement, and we all need a way in, and we find different people help us in, and others don't, who might be much better than us. But, you know, people say things or show you things or talk about things that aren't even music, could be painting, could be literature, could be anything. And that rings a bell. So it's very, I do agree that you can't teach composition as such, because although it is fashionable today to say anybody can do anything, and maybe they can in a way, given the right, you know, the right atmosphere somehow. But I do still think there are people gifted in a special way. Tim was one of those people, and perhaps he thought I was, and we shared something which wasn't a traditional way of teaching music. I'm sure he would agree with that. I'm not sure what to say in answer to your question.
I think what you say, that it rings a bell, is very powerful and very true. So it's something about fertilizing ground that hopefully is ready to accept that. But I wonder, so as a composer in current times and in the 20th century, how do you view then, when you say so composition cannot be taught, can be encouraged, but you do read in history books that, well, Beethoven went to Haydn, and so-and-so went to Bruckner, and that they studied composition, or Schubert was taking lessons in counterpoint. So do you think this thing of studying and even the thing of being a composer has changed since, let's say, 18th and 19th century, or did they mean also just encouragement when Beethoven went to Haydn, or I guess a hybrid of both?
Well, I expect you can certainly help things along in the sense of looking at other music and seeing how people put notes together. It is, after all, a building. It's like architecture. I mean, you have to know what doesn't go with what sounds better. You have to understand the instruments and how and what sound they make. And in fact, there's a lot in putting sounds together that a lot of people have no idea about. I mean, some people, for instance, are very naturally good at orchestration, but you can learn that to an extent. I mean, I suppose you can learn everything to an extent, and it is important. It's very important, I think, to have a role model. And in a way, a teacher is a role model and should be. And this, I think, is one reason why women have been so poorly represented as well in music, because there were no role models. You to go to a teacher, you went to a male teacher. But it's important to have someone to look up to, in fact, to believe in, to think that they know more than you, perhaps. And it should be, and so if you don't have that as another woman, that is a disadvantage. So what you say about, Beethoven going to Haydn and so on, well, all that is very important. And my own teacher, the most important teacher I had in my life was Jeremy Dale Roberts, who is he's dead now, sadly, very English indeed, but the sort of person who instinctively realized what one was trying to say, and helped one to say it, actually. So I think of him as somebody who not only changed my life, but actually made it in a way. And I also had I had very few lessons with Harrison Birtwistle, but I knew we had something in common the very first time I heard a work of his. And I asked him whether I could have a few lessons with him. And he said at the time that he was not a teacher, but yes, he liked my work a bit at the time. And he said I could come. And I think of 2 or 3 things he said to me, which have stayed with me and which made a huge difference to the way I was thinking. And I think that's partly because we had something in common in the way we thought, actually. I can't tell you exactly what it is, but it was there most definitely. So I think, yes, having a mentor or more than one is very, very important indeed. But, I just saying in a way that you can't teach talent, is what you can't teach. It is there or it isn't, and we still don't really understand it. It's just we lean towards something as people, and if we're lucky, that is, there is something we particularly love, and it it keeps us going, actually.
Speaking about women in music, and it's obviously a very important topic that's much discussed right now, and there's various attempts at dealing with it. On the other hand, let's quote Nadia Boulanger, who apparently, when she was asked by the Boston journalist, when she became the first woman to conduct the Boston Symphony, and was asked, how does it feel to be a woman conducting a symphony orchestra? She said, well, I've been a woman for 56 years and I've gotten used to it by now. And I would like to hear some of your responses. Well, for obviously your experiences in having been a woman composer for quite some time, and also your response to the current relevant and true interest, but also I think a measure of hype and virtue signaling that one sees with some organizations, and the quotas that are now introduced, and all sorts of remedies that might be good-willing and might be effective, and some are less effective, but it would be interesting to hear your views on this.
Well, of course, that is a huge subject. And so if you've got a few weeks to spare, we can talk about it. But I agree with everything you say, everything. I think the hype is awful. I also think it is extremely damaging, because when something becomes fashionable, it becomes unfashionable. And music, actually, good music should not be a fashion. So that is another thing. And I'll tell you a little story about this. I recently wrote a piano concerto, and it was played by Julian Jacobson and performed in Scotland at a very lovely concert, paired with Bartok and Nielsen. And it was recorded for broadcast. And when it was broadcast on the 8th of March, which is International Women's Day, which I deplore. And it was obviously in a concert of all women's music. And as well as that, in the early afternoon, when absolutely nobody would listen. And so as far as I'm concerned, I mean, obviously I wasn't going to say don't broadcast it, but the concert in Glasgow with the BBC Scottish was what I think of as my performance. And I do not think of the broadcast as anything that I'm particularly proud of, because I just don't like to be pigeonholed in this way. And I don't think anybody with any self-respect would like that. But having said that, to have somebody play your music and somebody else listen to it is a very important thing, because if it's never played, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist on paper. And so if the only way to hear music is for people to suddenly say, oh, women exist after all, then we cannot say no. I'm not in a position to refuse. So that's my story at the moment.
Well, I hear, and it makes sense what you say, and obviously this when you start getting into quotas of how much of what should be rather than choosing it on its own virtues, I think you get into all sorts of problems and all sorts of
well, I mean, that's not only a story, of course, of women, it's a general story as well. About who chooses and what is chosen, and who is famous and who isn't famous. I mean, all those things, they come into every profession, actually, every profession, really.
And you felt, you must have experienced, I guess, at times and at earlier times when you felt that, or you were told that, well, you're a woman and composing is not typically something that women do as much. Or so, have you felt this discrimination in earlier times?
Yes. The very first time, actually, I was still a student at the Royal College and was studying with someone called Bernard Stevens, a lovely man. I don't know a lot of his music, but I know some of his music. He then became somewhat better known as a communist than as a composer. But however, he was a very nice man. And sometimes after college, we would go over to the pub, and another student called John Wilkes, who was studying with him at the time, and we went to the pub, and he said to John, well, the trouble is for Erika, she can't just pop into the pub without us. We're going to the pub with her, but she can't just go to the pub and meet people, you know. So I then thought, oh, can't I? So I suppose he's right, I can't. And it has often been like that. My very first concert on the South Bank was, there were 4 composers, there were 3 men, and I was the one woman. And although I had the best write-up, the best review of all the 4, all of the others made a career after that, and I didn't. So there is a lot in that. Yes, I do. I have felt it many times. Yes.
Well, I'm very sorry for that. And of course, in that sense, let's hope that the situation is improving, and well, your music stands, and you have champions more and more, and Tom Addis being one of them, and a very ardent one at that. And maybe this is a good time to return from where I've sidetracked with all these other questions and hear some more of your music and see some more examples and have you explain some more things.
Well, since we were talking about heterophony and about this piece, Osenschmal, which you've seen a bit of because you showed it, maybe we could hear a little bit of it. You just stop it wherever you like, but it's track 14. Yeah. Okay, I mean, there's another picture here that I'd quite like to show. It's again by Blauer. It's track 15, and it's a sort of illustration of an ecstatic dance. And I remember one of the Jewish holidays, which is called Simchat Torah, which means rejoicing in the law. People did dance around and sing. And my grandfather used to make me a little flag to wave around and things. And this picture reminds me so much of that. He's an extraordinary artist, really extraordinary, unlike anybody else at all in the world, really. Yes, anyway, thank you. So Oh, yes. Well, I think the next lot I've got here really are all examples of scores.
What I wanted to ask you about is we've heard instrumental music, but you've mentioned the two piano piece, and I, of course, am immediately my ears perk up, especially as a pianist. And do you have is there a sound example for the two piano piece?
I have got a bit of an example of that. Track 28 and A and 28B are the scores of are part of the score of that two piano piece, and then track 29 has a little bit of an example of it.
Let's hear that, and I will simultaneously show the corresponding score excerpts. So
just 2 pages from the two piano piece. It's just called Exercise for Two Pianos.
yes, here it is. Here's the score.
I've just taken 2 pages at random, really.
Very interesting. Unlike from the more traditional Western ways.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, in a way, it brings me to another aspect of my music that, in a way, is the most important one. And that's the theatre. I've always been interested in the theatre. There was a time I used to go to the theatre much more than to concerts. And a lot of my music is theatre music. And even this two piano piece, the pianists have to move around. And they move around in a rather stylized way. And I thought of the piece this way. It wasn't just the notes. I always thought of it as a theatre piece. And I have written various pieces of theatre music. One of them, the earliest one, has never been performed, but it's called The Slaughterer, which is which was another important aspect when I was little, because there is, in the Jewish tradition, there's a ritual slaughterer, and because animals are killed in a particular way. I think it's the same in Islam, because there was a time when halal butchers but there were kosher butchers. And a friend of mine from Pakistan used to buy his meat at a kosher butcher. Now, I'm not an observant Jew, and I'm not even a believer, but this is a wonderful story, based on a wonderful story by Isaac Bashevis Singer, who was a fantastic writer, mostly of short stories, but not only, who lived in the States but came from Russia, and won the Nobel Prize, in fact, even though he wrote in Yiddish, which is a most esoteric language. Yes, so that piece hasn't been performed, but other theatre pieces of mine have been performed. And one of them was called The Bet, with a libretto by Elaine Feinstein. And it's a kind of fairy story. And the other one is called The Dancer Hotoke. And they both have an important aspect, which I think of a lot in my work. I love puppetry because because somehow the puppets are not oneself. It happens at one remove, and I'm interested in that, and because it's part of it. It can be seen as a kind of ritual, as can all theatre, of course, so you know, there are only very bad recordings of, and this is one of the puppets from the Dancer Hotoke. The Dancer Hotoke is a story that comes from a no play, a Japanese no play, of course. And the no theatre was another very strong interest of mine, because again, things don't happen on stage. They're very stylized. Everything is stylized. The opening, and it's very, very slow. It moves very slowly, and you have to immerse yourself absolutely in that. That's another one of the puppets. She's called the Spirit of Unhappiness. That, in fact, was performed at the Almeida Theatre and also elsewhere, of course, and in schools. In fact, that work was the first work I wrote on which I could have fed my cats for a year. I mean, I'm talking about what I earned from that. So yes, I have just a very small example of the bet, and also in scores, and a little example a little example of the music too, just a small example. Not very good performances, but you can show them if you like. I think the bet is that's part of the music. It's part of the beginning of the bet.
If I stop here, but I wanted to ask a couple of things. One of them about the Almeida Theatre, and in fact, in one of the earlier sessions, Pierre Audi took part, and I know Pierre from elsewhere. So could you talk about the bet at Almeida? Was that still during his time?
Yes, it was, and in fact, I had a number of things with Pierre Audi because we also did a John Cage work at the Almeida when Pierre Audi was there, and it was John Cage came along, and he had written what he called Your Operas 1 and 2, and they consisted of composers with old-fashioned gramophones, playing bits of old arias, and singers coming along and singing the odd aria. And then two pianists were playing kind of John Cage's music in the background. It was like a collage. It was extraordinarily powerful, wonderful, actually, absolutely wonderful. And I was lucky enough to be one of the composers, and we traveled along with him. And I felt very privileged because he died soon after. We spent a little time together while he was still alive. Anyway, the bet was performed at the Almeida only once. It was performed on the South Bank as a concert performance, and then at the Almeida with wonderful puppetry and super playing, absolutely wonderful. So that it was ostensibly for children, but not really. It was for anybody. And yes, I mean, I didn't know Pierre Audi well, but a little, you know. So that happened. I don't know what to say about it. It was also recorded, and a very slightly shorter version taken on a tour of schools. It toured 100 schools or more, actually. Yes, I don't know what to say. It was marvelous, marvelous performance, marvelous puppetry.
Yeah,
I absolutely adore puppets. When I went to Prague, are you interested in them?
Yes, absolutely.
Really?
Yes. I find it, and also your relationship with what puppetry symbolizes, I think is very.
It is so important, and also puppets, in the same way as music can, puppets can illustrate a great deal in just one movement, a tiny movement. It says everything. I mean, a person can speak for half an hour and not say as much as a puppet can say with one movement. It's extraordinary, really.
I'm going to throw a random question at you, but hopefully one that you might enjoy. You have greetings from Jared McBurney, who was delighted that we're talking today. And then he said,
"Oh, really?"
Yes. And he said, I once had a fascinating...
I haven't seen Gerard for many years, but...
Jared said that he once had a fascinating conversation with you about Cornelius Cardew. And he says, if she does not mention him, you should throw in the question.
Well, I can't remember the conversation, but I did know Cornelius a bit. In fact, he came to my house with John Tilbury, a very old friend of mine, who actually has written a biography of Cornelius Cardew. And he's a pianist. He really specializes mostly in people like Morton Feldman and so on. He was a wonderful pianist. He's not quite retired, but more or less retired. Yes, I mean, Cornelius was a very extraordinary man, a very interesting man. I was very sorry and sad when he suddenly took up kind of Maoism and started writing revolutionary songs, whereas before he wrote some very interesting contemporary music. But I'm not sure what Gerard means, but maybe he's thinking of something I mentioned, because once at the Commonwealth Institute in London, which sadly no longer exists, John Tilbury and Cornelius Cardew were playing a work that I am now no longer sure who it was by. I don't think it was Morton Feldman, but it might have been Terry Riley. I can't remember. I'm really sorry. But I do remember what happened, because they were playing two pianos, and it was very long and very slow. And after a while, people began to walk out. And they began to walk out quite loudly, you know, walk, 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 bang the door, or etc. And Cornelius event, I mean, it was very long, you know, this, I can't even remember, hours. And eventually, Cornelius, which was, I suppose, more like his nature, stopped. I don't think this work had actually a beginning and a middle and an end. I mean, I think it was a sort of continuous. So Cornelius stopped and left the stage. But John, who is quite a stubborn sort of chap, went on till the bitter end by himself. And a few of us stayed on. I mean, I did because I was a friend of his, and another friend of his was with me. But it was hard going. But one had to absolutely admire it. But I don't remember whether that is the story I told Gerard. It could have been. I don't know, but I'm really pleased you've heard from Gerard, and I would love to hear from him myself. It's so long since I have. He was a very interesting man, and a very fine musician.
I'll connect the two of you. So, and certainly because I've taken up very much of your afternoon, and you've been patient and providing us with fascinating responses despite the technology that can be an irritant.
Well, you know, obviously it's lovely of you to ask me, and it's been absolutely delightful to meet you.
But same for me. But I want to ask you a more general question to maybe, well, that's echoes with the different things that you've highlighted. And your early experiences with Hasidic music, your exposure to the religion and the culture in the family. Yet you just said some minutes ago that you don't practice the religion and that you're not religious. And this fascinates me. Well, then your relationship with being Jewish, it's something that I relate to as well. Being Jewish, coming from the Soviet Union, not practicing the religion, not perhaps being religious. So it interests me how you feel that, how you define it for yourself.
Well, I've rather changed, but I don't think that the change is unusual. I think I've heard it many times. I mean, as a very young girl, not a child, I mean a young girl, I really felt very rejecting of the religion. I felt it was stultifying and somehow it allowed no freedom of thought and so on. That's how I felt. It could have been partly because as a woman, you're never quite a part of it. You're always somehow outside. But I rejected it. But later, I began to think that I didn't really want to reject all of it. I didn't want to reject it out of hand. Because, of course, partly one has to acknowledge that people don't like Jews. There is a lot of anti-Semitism about, and I'm not talking now in a political sense and so on. There's, that's a big question as well. And I have to say at this point that I belong to a society. It's called Jews for Justice for the Palestinians. And so I can't say I'm very active because I feel a bit old and tired to be that active, but I have been on a march and so on. So that's a political question. But I nevertheless feel that I want to be counted. I don't want to deny where I am from or who I am. And that's fine. I now feel it. And so I do keep a few things in a way just to, as it were, join myself to the community. So I go to the synagogue, not a Hasidic one, because I'm just not religious enough and I wouldn't be accepted probably. But I do belong to a synagogue, and I go on the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, and on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, I go. I don't fast, but I do go, and I like to listen to the music and everything. And I also usually observe one Passover night, a Seder night. I like to go to that. You can go to a communal one. I mean, I haven't got family anymore that we can take part, but there are communal ones you can join, and I tend to join, not always, but from time to time I have been. So so that's my take on my background, really. I used to kind of never mention the fact that I'm Jewish. I don't mention it now unless somebody asks me, but nowadays I am more upfront about being Jewish than I once was, because also you learn as you get older that people see you the way they see you, not necessarily as you are, and they see you with their eyes. And so really, I'll never be English. I said this in my little few words that I wrote. Nobody who isn't born in England is English. I have British nationality, which I am proud of in a way, because my life was saved here. And so I'm grateful. Of course I am, but I will never be English. I don't feel English, and I'm not seen as English. I'll never be seen as English, and I've lived here since I was 2 3/4. So, you know, I don't know what to say, but does that answer something that you are interested in? I don't know.
Absolutely.
You've asked me a question. I'm never sure whether I've answered it.
No, you make great answers, and I think there's something well, very much pertaining to you and your experience, but also something that that all of us can take away from it, or relate to the feeling of acceptance, the feeling of being an outsider, the creative impulse out of our childhood experiences, and how that propels itself like a projectile in unexpected ways into the future. I'm very grateful that you shared so many things and so many aspects about being yourself, being accepted, being rejected, and in a way that is so direct in the best sense, the way that your music I find is. And I am grateful for this chance to get to know your music, and I'll be getting to know your music more. And I think that goes the same for those that joined us and listened very attentively. And I just want to thank you one more time for doing this, for suffering through the technological limits that did not stop us from doing this. So thank you so much.
Well, I mean, you know, I want, of course, thank you very much for helping me with your friend who just came. She just left actually, but she did help me with the technology. And I'm sorry I'm so silly at it. I only know one other person who's a musician who is worse than me and who doesn't even have a computer. But other than that, but of course, you know, I thank you very much for your invitation and for a lovely time, and particularly, you know, really getting to know you a little bit. And I very much hope we can meet in person.
Yes, let us plan on that. And until then, please be very well. I wish everyone a healthy and safe time ahead. And see you next time. But for now, good night.
Thank you.
So much.